Good morning, church. I hope you're having a blessed day today. Today we are continuing our series on understanding faith. And today what I want to look at is something very interesting. We'll do this a little bit quickly today. But yesterday we looked at Sarah, who through faith received the promise of God. And we learned that it wasn't really even a moment of walking in faith, because she wasn't really in agreement with this promise, wasn't really thinking it was true and walking in it being true through her actions, but she did judge God faithful. And the thing that she said, she still was in agreement with God. And that's what brought forth the promise. Very, very interesting. That's a powerful thing. If you can catch that revelation, that will change your life. Today I want to continue in this understanding of being able to walk in the promises of God and trusting God. And what I want to talk about right now specifically right now is the story before Sarah bears the child. Yesterday we started talking about this whole childbearing thing, and we looked at Sarah, and we're going to look at Abraham tomorrow. But I want to look at this story, and I apologize, I'm messaging with my wife, but let me just let me read this really quick. It says, "Then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, What hast thou done unto us, and what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and my kingdom a great sin, that thou hast done deeds unto me that thou ought not to be done? And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What sawest thou that thou hast done this thing?" And you can continue to read this story. I encourage you to read all of this. This is in Genesis chapter 20. Genesis chapter 20. And I just want you to catch this. See, I'm teaching you how to live by faith. I'm teaching you how to understand this thing called faith. And I taught you all the mechanism of it, the pieces of it, what it is, how it works. But now I want to look at application. We're looking at people, we're looking at stories, we're looking at examples. How do people go from hearing God say something to actually having it in their life? That's what we're trying to learn. That's all what faith is all about. Because it's through faith that the promises of God are brought into our life. It's the vessel that allows us to connect, the mechanism that connects, the appropriation of the things of God. That's what faith is all about. Hearing God say something and then having it manifest into our life, and from start to finish, that process is faith. And learning that and how to see it and seeing it applied is one of the best ways in learning how to live this type of life. Because as we've said many times, most people get stopped in this part called experience. They've never had any experience, they've had bad experiences, and they're trying to figure out how to do this thing. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The very first time you ever receive a certain promise of God is always the hardest. Like the first time I ever saw supernatural provision from God, it was the hardest time to be able to see it, because I'd never seen it before. And I am trusting and believing in God for something that I've never seen in my life. Now, I thank God because there were hundreds of sermons and testimonies, not just in the Bible. This is what I was trusting in, but I could look at other missionaries and pastors and people, and I could hear the stories of how God did it for them. Well, I'm doing the same things they're doing. So if God would do it for them, God will do it for me, because there's no difference. God is no respecter of persons. We're all equal in the eyes of God. And I began to just apply these things unto my life. And I still do this even today. You know, I've been doing this almost 4 years now. And all the things I've taught, I've seen in my life. So I've got my own experience in all of these areas and subjects. I think there's only, we haven't raised the dead yet, because I haven't found any dead people yet. Like, Call me when they're dead. We'll be more than happy to raise them. Then we can put that under our belt. But when I teach these things like provision and miracles and power and all this stuff, we've seen it now. But before I hadn't seen it. So I looked at the lives of other people and I was like, okay, what did you do that I could learn from to figure out how to receive in the same type of way? It's not going to be the same thing. We're different people. We do different stuff. But in the same type of manner, you receive promises from God. How can I do that? And I still do that today. I listen and watch testimonies constantly from Bible teachers and pastors and evangelists and missionaries and all that kind of stuff. But one of the most interesting things is not just looking at success, but it's looking at people's failures, where they came short. And I've shared the testimony many times. This is not one of those like good testimonies. This is one of my big failures. I mean, and I say that just very, very candidly. I've shared it before, and I tell people all the time. In 4 years, there's only been one time where I've ever went against my confession, believing in the supernatural provision of God, based on what God told me in 1 Kings 17 verses 3 and verses 4. And we talk about the success a lot because we got hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more testimonies now. We've been doing this so long. But when I look at my life based on 1 Kings 17, I don't waver in that ever. I mean, that's the foundation of my life. That's the anchor of my soul. But there was one day, over 3 years ago now, when I was in Chicago and I hadn't seen it yet. I'd never seen God supernaturally provide. And so I'm having to believe for something, one, I've never seen. Two, is the reason I backslid from God for 5 years. Because I lived completely contrary to the thing I was believing for now. And so, I mean, everything was stacked against me. And I had bills piling up and I needed money. And I was having a very, very hard time. And it's the only time I did it, but I remember I was actually in a park. And I was walking around this park in Chicago right next to my apartment. And I was on the phone with my prayer partner, and I just went against my confession. Spoke against it, was mad, was upset, said a bunch of things that I shouldn't have said. And I bless God for this woman. She's, older black lady, and she's been with me forever. And she corrected me right there in the moment and told me to start watching, because during the time of the Southwest Believers Convention. And so I turned it on, and there's Jerry Savelle, and I start listening to him talk about promise and miracles, and faith began to rise back up on the inside of me. And I tell you, I repented right there in that moment in sackcloth and ashes. And I don't really ever tell this, but if you've seen pictures before, I used to have some hair on my head. I used to have a little bit longer hair, and I slick it back a little bit from when I was in the car business and different stuff like that. I cut my hair that day, and people are like, wait, why? Well, the Apostle Paul, if you look in the book of Acts, when they were going up to the temple to be consecrated, it says they shaved their head. And it was one of those moments in my life where I made a commitment to God. I would never back off on my confession ever again. And the sign of this newness, walking into this new consecration with the Lord, I shaved my head. And I cut my hair off, and I've never had long hair again. And this is not for people. This is for me. And I don't talk about that often, about why I do that. But there's a reason why I constantly keep my hair short. It's a constant reminder of that consecration moment when I had to make a choice whether I really did believe this or not. And it was like that make it or break it moment. Do you really believe? And of course, it was only less than 2 weeks later I saw the first big piece of supernatural provision in my life. And here we are now on the other side of the world, and God is still providing. You say, well, why are we talking about that testimony? Because I've shared that before. Well, what happens in Genesis 20? Well, Genesis 20 is not the only time this happened. It's happened with Pharaoh in Egypt too, just a couple chapters earlier. But Abraham gets into this time in Genesis chapter 20 with King Abimelech. So they journey, and they dwelled in Kadesh and Shurgar and Greer, and they're going down to this land that's under the control of King Abimelech. And Abraham looks at Sarah and says, just tell the king you're my sister. If you remember, it's not the first time he did this. The first time he did this was with Pharaoh, and it was not good. Well, here we go again. He does the same thing. Oh, she's my sister. Abimelech's like, man, I want this woman. Which, side note, a king wants Sarah to be his wife, and she's 90 years old. What must have Sarah looked like? I mean, Sarah must have been a looker. Like, I don't know a better way to say that. Like, she must have been gorgeous. Seriously. I mean, of all the beautiful women down there in that land, this is the king. He could have been looking for girls in their 20s or 30s, and he wants the woman that's 90 to be his wife. Like, that's like a side note. You better throw that in there and get your mind straight. You can be 100 and be gorgeous. Like, you ain't got to be old and wrinkly and fat. Like, you ain't got to do that. I mean, you could be so beautiful at 90 that a king wants you. Just a little side note on that. But Abimelech, they get Sarah, and they take her into a room, and they're going to get her dolled up for the marriage. And that night, God comes to Abimelech and says, I'm going to kill you. What? Kill me? Abimelech's like, I'm a righteous man. What you talking about? You going to kill me? I didn't do nothing wrong. And God says, you got another man's wife in your house. What do you mean another man's wife? That man said that she was his sister, not his wife. Abimelech calls Abraham, says, what have you done to me? God's going to kill me because of what you said. You said she was your sister. And then Abraham does this little thing that so many people do. Well, technically, she is my sister. She's the daughter of my father, just not the daughter of my mother. So technically, she's my half-sister. Like, she technically is sister, but she's also my wife. Yeah, you're right. She's my wife too. People do that all the time. That's what we call like half-truths. Half-truths are always lies. Don't ever give half-truths. If you make a mistake, own the mistake. Don't live in half-truths. Just live in the truth. And that should convict all of us. Every one of us. Don't speak partials. Just say it like it is. It is what it is. Own it. Receive the grace of God. Receive the mercy of God. And move forward. And we look at this right here. And Abraham looks at Abimelech and says, hey, yeah, she's my sister. And she also my wife. And Abimelech's like, take your wife back. Like, I'm not going to die because of this. And then he even blesses Abraham in the process. And then Abraham prays, and God heals Abimelech in the house. And, everything's okay. And Sarah goes back to Abraham. But here's why I wanted to talk about this story. Just for a moment. I want you to catch this. Chapter 21, verse 1. And the Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. Verse 2, for Sarah conceived. Chapter 21. The very first part of chapter 21. She bears a kid. And it's Abraham's child. The promised child. It's Isaac. But in chapter 20, Abraham is about to let this other man take his wife. Like, let me just explain this to you. He is a moment away. I mean, a moment away from the promise. He's just a moment away. And he faces one of the greatest attacks of his entire walk of faith. If that man has sex with Sarah, the promise is over. It will be over. Because Abraham has given up his wife, and that man's going to have sex with Sarah. She's going to have a kid, but it's not going to be Abraham's. And he won't have his promised child. He would have lost his wife. It would have been adultery. It would have been sin. Like, we talk about how, I've said this so many times. How close can you get to receiving the promise of God and waver and quit a moment before the miracle? See, the greatest attacks of the enemy against your life and against your walk in faith are a moment before the breakthrough. It's always the hardest time. That step 5, that experience, you're just a moment away from receiving, and something happens in your life. And you got to make a decision whether you really believe God or not. That's what's so powerful about Genesis 20 and 21. Because 21 is the promise. But chapter 20 is like, dude, you're willing to give up your wife. And this is what you need to understand. If God didn't intervene, we'd have a very big problem on our hand. It took the intervention of God to save this promise in the world today. Because if it was for Abraham, his wife would have gone to another man, and the promise would never have happened. That right there is incredible to me. When we look at the life of Sarah and Abraham, and we look at this birth of the promised child, Isaac, and we're going to look some more at Abraham tomorrow, but when we look at this story of promises and children, and it was a hard thing to bring to pass. It took a lot of mercy and a lot of grace and a lot of intervention of God. It took God intervening again and again and again. It's like they couldn't get their self figured out on whether they believe this thing or not. And how often is that true in our lives? That God speaks a promise and declares a thing to us, and we're like, let me be very frank, do you really believe it or not? And I just wanted to talk about this because you could be a moment away from receiving that promise. And the thing is, what are you going to do? You going to let the king take your wife? Or are you going to say what's true and believe God to protect you through it? We thank God that there's grace and mercy and that God intervenes. But I just want you to look at that story, and I want you to really ponder it. Like, man, if God didn't intervene, that man would have taken his wife. A moment before the promise. Abraham knew what time she would bear a child. God said it according to the time of life. In 1 year from when God said, in 1 year she'll bear a child. Abraham knew the date. Yet what happened? And I just want you to see these details. They're so important. Because, we're moments away from the promise. And look at what happens. Father, bless these people in Jesus' name. We give you all the glory. Amen and amen. Church, I love you. God bless you. Have a great day. Like, follow, share, drop us a comment, and we will see you tomorrow.